up and start discussing chapter 6. Remember, we have 3 chapters to get through today. So chapter 6, estates and interests in real property. This is going to be interesting. I'm going to set you up that way because it's really hard and everybody's going to pull their hair out. There would be great weeping and gnashing of teeth. No, I'm kidding. Estates and interest. I got about 5 or 6 minutes to introduce the topic and start talking about it before we take a break. So, at the end of this chapter, you should be able to identify the characteristics of estates in land, as well as describe the characteristics of encumbrances, such as liens, easements, and encroachments, and there are others. So, estates or ownership in land. There's only 2 types of estates in real property. One is called a freehold estate, meaning ownership interest. The other one is called a leasehold estate, or also known as a less than freehold estate. Freehold estates, you own or have ownership interest in property. Less than freehold, leasehold estates, you do not have ownership interest, but you have rights of interest in the property. What? But not ownership rights. What? Here's what's going to happen. Today in chapter 6, we're going to be talking about freehold estates. On Monday, when we talk about leases, landlords, and tenants, we're going to talk about leasehold estates, which are less than freehold. But today, during chapter 6, the beginning of it, we're going to talk about freehold estates, ownership interest in real property. And there's 3 different types of freehold interests. In New Jersey, we recognize fee simple, fee determinable, and life estates, all having ownership interest in real property. In leasehold estates, you don't own property, but have an interest in property, rights to property granted to you through a lease. And a lease would be classified as personal property. You don't own real property, you don't control real property, but you have an interest in real property granted to you by the lease. You have the right of possession, use for legal purposes, etc., but not all the rights of ownership. So today we're going to talk about freehold estates. The 3 again were fee simple, fee determinable, and life estate. So let's take the first one first. Fee simple estate. New Jersey recognizes fee simple estate as the highest interest you can achieve in real property, which means the holder of the deed is entitled to all rights of ownership in the property. Remember, we just delineated them in the last chapter. You have all the rights of ownership. You own the real property and can do with it what you will. All subject to public and private restrictions, obviously. But it's the highest recognized form of interest in real property is the ownership right of fee simple, sometimes called fee simple, or fee simple absolute. Those are the 3 terms given a fee simple interest or estate in real property. And upon the death of the owner of that estate, the rights and the estate to the estate pass to their heirs, if there's a will and there's heirs to give it to. So once again, fee simple is the highest recognized ownership interest in real property by law in New Jersey. The holder of the fee simple estate is entitled to all rights of ownership. And upon the death, the estate passes to his heirs. It's called fee simple, or fee simple absolute. Was there any questions about what a fee simple or a freehold estate is so far? Not seeing any questions. Then let's move on. The second type of freehold estate is called a fee determinable interest. In New Jersey, an estate that can be terminated on the occurrence or non-occurrence of a special event, meaning fee determinable means a conditional ownership interest in real property. And usually has a reverter or remainder man clause. What? So fee determinable means you're taking ownership of real estate, but there's conditions that you must abide by to keep ownership of that property. So let's say I'm selling a house and I put in it, the house must be painted forest green for eternity. That means whoever buys the house after I sell it has to keep the house painted green. But someone comes along and paints it orange. Well, guess what? The moment they start changing the paint color in the house, under what is known as a reverter clause, the rights of ownership are automatically stripped from that owner and given to my estate holders, my heirs, without charge. What? Yeah, so fee determinable is a very interesting topic, which we'll continue talking about at 11 o'clock. Right now it's 10:30. It's time for our coffee break, and I need a fresh cup. So I will leave the conversation open, and I will see you guys at 11 a.m., at which time we're going to resume and move on. So see you then. time start again? It's 11 o'clock. Guys, just a reminder, please, no posting of any links, images, pictures, anything except discussion threads. That's all we're allowed to do in the chat section. I don't want to seem harsh or critical, but I have a responsibility to protect the integrity of the system. If I just let anybody post anything, we're going to have real problems. So please understand, it's the policy of the school that we cannot post stuff, pictures, links, anything in the chat room, just to be aware of that. So let's move on. We're talking about a fee determinable interest or a conditional ownership of real property. This can happen in many different ways. A deed restriction with a reverter or remainderment clause creates a fee determinable interest. So what do you mean, deed restriction? We're going to discuss later this morning deed restrictions or private restrictions on private property that can be created, by a developer, subdeveloper, builder, or actual owner of property. So like I used before, this house must remain painted emerald green in perpetuity. If I put that in my deed, that means me. And whoever else down the chain buys this house must keep it painted emerald green. If they don't like it, they don't have to buy the house. Now, obviously, that could interfere with the valuation of my property because maybe people don't like the color green and wouldn't want to buy the house just for that aspect. Well, in that case, then I may have devalued my own property by adding this restriction. However, if you do buy my property, then you must paint it emerald green forever as long as you own it, and the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. And if someone decides to change the color of the house under what is known as a reverter clause. A reverter clause says that if the violation is, if the condition is violated, then the ownership rights automatically transfer back to the original, the grantor or his estate. Meaning, if you buy my house and start painting it white, you automatically lose the rights of ownership because the deed states so. The reverter clause allows the ownership rights then to be transferred back to me or my heirs, whoever still exists. Now, my heirs obviously have to be aware of the property and the condition and keep a tab on that property. But if they notice that the color changes, they could enforce the conditional interest. The owner would then be forced to either paint the house green or give up ownership of the property. If they don't paint it green, then my kids just inherited a property for free at no cost to them, and that owner is out of luck. He no longer owns a property, but still owns a big mortgage on the property, and he's surely out of luck. SOL. Surely out of luck. Wow, I didn't know these things existed. Yes, they do. In fact, if you ever looked at purchasing historically registered properties, something that's registered on the historic registry, there usually are fee determinable interest granted to owners, which say you cannot violate the covenants conditions granted to you by the deed, which state the exterior of the building must never change. If you do, the Historical Commission may have the right, if there's a reverter clause, to say, I'm sorry, but you have to vacate the property. You lose all rights to the property because you made a change that was not allowed on the property. Guys, I'm being very serious here. These things do exist. So it's imperative that when we counsel buyers and buying properties, we always recommend to them, as soon as attorney review is over, to have a title search performed on the documents of ownership. That way they'll find out for sure if the owner's hiding any conditions or issues regarding the property, if there's any reverter clauses, so that if there is a condition you're made aware of it, you can say, hey, just discovered that the deed requires that I remain celibate as long as they own the house. You can take this house and, take it back. I'm not buying it. So that's why we do title searches, to find out what those conditions, if the owner doesn't disclose. So I said a reverter clause, meaning it comes back to me or my estate if the condition is violated. Now, not all deed restrictions have reverter clauses. Those are just deed restrictions. Like no loud noises after 10:30 and before 8 a.m. Well, I'm not taking your property if you're playing your tuba at 3 o'clock in the morning. However, if the condition is green and you violate that, then I am taking your property back through a reverter clause. All rights of ownership transfer back to me automatically upon discovery, and you have no say in the matter. Get out of the house. I'm kicking you out. And if you don't, the sheriff's going to come and evict you. Or I could have what's known as a remainder man clause, which means it doesn't come back to me. It goes to a third party, someone else other than me or my heirs. So a fee determinable ownership interest is one that is conditional and has a reverter or remainder man interest in it. A simple deed restriction is not a fee determinable interest. It could, however, if there was reverter or remainder man interest in the documents. Now, I just have to know, how many people did I just confuse the hell out of? Anybody have any questions here? Me. Okay, thank you for being honest. This is not rocket science, but again, it's not your run-of-the-mill stuff. Let's just take an example. So me, the seller, sells to you, the buyer, my house with a fee determinable interest, and that interest is must be used as a single family residence in perpetuity, meaning you can never change the zoning on the property. It must stay single family. So you buy the house from me. The fee determinable interest is that if you change the zoning, the reverter clause says, upon changing of the zoning on the property, the house automatically reverts back to the original grantor, me, the grantor. That's a G, believe it or not. I'm the grantor. So your ownership rights now revert back to me under the reverter clause or my heirs if I'm dead. Either goes to me or my heirs, either one. Whoever's alive at the time. So you now don't own the property. You have a big mortgage you got to pay. And the mortgage company says, where's the money? And you have to default on your loan because you can't pay it back. Then you declare bankruptcy, commit suicide, and your whole lineage. Oh, I'm sorry. So got off the track there. But you can see where the issues can arise if you don't understand the type of ownership that you have. Questions? Go ahead. So remainder goes to someone other than the grantor or their heirs, Jason. Yes, that would be correct statement. If someone buys a historic home, but it needs maintenance or repairs, what are the limits? Depends on the historical commission's rules on that house. Usually you can't change the exterior of the building except to repair or replace what's there and using the same material, techniques, and tradesmen that did it when it was created. So you can't use modern tools, power tools. You can't use modern materials. It must be the exact same material was used then. Many different rules and regulations. Let's see. Why do you still have to pay the mortgage if the ownership is no longer yours? Because you took the mortgage out against the house and you personally guaranteed the loan with a promissory note. What is the buyer sells the house to someone else? Then they are also bound by the same condition, Karen. In perpetuity means forever. Remainder is always third party, correct. Was this your fee determinable? Why do they exist? Doesn't matter. Doesn't have anything to do with your test. That it exists is all you have to know, Gary. Who determines these rules? Whatever the deed states determines the rules. So if the page, yeah. Okay, fee determinable always has conditions for new owner? Yes. The title search reveal that? Yeah, they better, or else you could have a whopper of a lawsuit against the owner for non-disclosure material defect. What is an example? Who is the third party might be? Anybody who's not related to me, my heirs, or the person who has possession of the property at the moment. Could be someone neutral, third party. It's definitely worth doing a title search. Absolutely it is. Yes, indeed. All right, good questions. Moving on. So once again, there's fee simple, highest recognized ownership in real estate. Nobody's going to question your ownership. You have all the rights and rules and regulations that accompany ownership. Fee determinable means you have a conditional ownership interest in property that if that condition is violated, you may lose control of the property where it reverts back to the owner or goes to remainderment, a third party unassociated with the transaction. And then there's something called a life estate interest in real property. What is a life estate? A life estate is an interest, an ownership interest granted to a person, but it is limited to the life of that person. So let's see who's online. It was Gary, right? Gary, you're on here. Yep, Gary Keating. So I say to Gary one day, Gary, you've been a good worker for us, and I'm going to give you my Malibu beach house for a life estate. Gary's like, baby, yeah, Malibu beach house, that's mine. It is, for as long as you're alive. But the day you die, the ownership interest automatically reverts back to me or my heirs of the estate. In other words, a life estate always comes with either a reversionary interest or a remainderment interest, just like a conditional or fee determinable interest, except this time ownership interest is granted on the life of the person who's named. So if I say to Gary, I'm giving you a life estate based on your life, he gets to use that Malibu beach house as if it's his own. He doesn't have to pay mortgage, but he does have to pay taxes and maintain the property. Can't let it go to waste. That's the only conditions of a life estate. He could sell his interest to someone else. He's not selling the house or estate. He's selling his interest or life estate to another. Meaning, if he sold his right to Mark Badia, Mark now owns the life estate of the property, but it's based on Gary's life. That way, if Gary dies, then Mark just lost all control of the property and he has to move out immediately because it's not his anymore. It reverts back to me or my heirs. Why would people do such a thing? There's many reasons why people do these things, and it happens more than you know. So a life estate is granted to a person based on their life. Once their life is done, so is their life estate. Or it could be tied to a third party. That's called a life estate pour autre vie. Now, I don't speak French, but pour autre vie means for the life of another. So a life estate I'm going to give to Gary based on Mark's life means Gary uses that house as if it's his own until Mark dies, but the moment Mark dies, Gary's got to move out because the life estate interest ends based on a third party. So far, does anybody have any questions about what a life estate is or does? Couple of questions. Mark's like, where's I want my estate back. Kira, can you explain a reversionary? Okay, one more time. A reversionary interest, also known as the reverter clause, states that upon the death, in this case, the death of the life tenant, the property automatically reverts back to the owner or his heirs, and all rights of ownership now are given back to the grantor, the seller, or the heirs of the seller. Or they actually just gave you the estate. It's not even sold to you. Let's see. What do we got? Are they only used in gifting scenarios? Mostly, Mindy, mostly, yes. Now, it could, maybe it's not, but there are other life estates that are not gifts. Why confuse it? Just call it reverter clause then. I don't want to confuse anybody. A reverter clause also known as a reversionary interest, which is, by the way, in your leases as well. Your landlord is giving you a part of his estate and some of the rights, but when you terminate it, those rights come back to the landlord. There's a reversionary interest in a lease as well. So I hopefully understood now what a reversionary interest is. Let's see. Why on earth would someone do a life estate? Okay, let me moderate the conversation and stop all questions at the moment. I'll address this, Amelia. There's several reasons. In fact, while I was a councilman in Oakland several years ago, we were looking for two pieces of property that we could combine so that we could create a senior housing component for our low and moderate income requirements under COA, Council on Affordable Housing. We identified two prime properties that would be perfect for our use next to the first aid building, which is right next to the senior center. So it would be great, perfect location. The problem was both owners were still alive. So we negotiated with them both to purchase their property upon when they decide to leave the property. The first owner within a year said, I'm ready to sell the house, so I'll be glad to sell it to the town. However, the second property owner said this, I don't know that I want to sell the property to the town. So we made that seller just wait a few months until the seller came back to us and said this, you know what? I'm not going to sell the property to the town. What I'm going to do is dedicate it to the town free of charge. That saves the town hundreds of thousands of dollars. What a nice person. However, the gift of this property, dedication of private property to a public entity is called dedication, is contingent on a life estate granted to Aunt B. Let's just call her Aunt B. So we said, that's wonderful. So we bought the first lot, and now we're waiting for Aunt B to die. Because when she does, the life estate granted to B ends, and the remainderman, the town of Oakland, receives the property without charge. Now we have both properties. Now we can build our senior housing component. That's an example of why someone may want to use a life estate for a specific gifting purpose. There are other issues in life estates, like preserving a family house. When both my parents were committed to full-time care, there was a choice we had to make. But first, let me just fill in the blanks here. This is like the rest of the story that you don't hear about. Almost 20 years ago, I had one of my, in fact, 20 years to this year, I had my best year ever in real estate. I made buco bucks. So I said to my father, Dad, I want to buy the family house from you. He goes, but son, where are we going to live? I said, no, you don't understand. I'm going to buy the house from you so you have no mortgage. And the money I give you, you and Ma can travel the world and do whatever you want. He said, but son, I don't want to move out of the house. There's nothing for us to go to. I said, no. I'm going to let you stay and live in the house as long as you're alive. Why would you do that? To preserve the family house, Dad. Because I know Mom's health is starting to fail, and I know yours is starting to fail. He goes, yeah, I don't want to talk about it, but yeah, that's true. I said, what happens when you both have to be committed to full-time care? Medicaid claims all your assets. They take everything, make you sell your real estate and cash in the chips, and they take all the money for your extended care. Yes, that's what happens. I said, that means we lose the family house. That's correct. I want that not to occur. So I want to buy the house so that if that point ever does come, we preserve the house. We keep it in the family. So let me get this straight. You're going to pay me to buy me my house now, but I get to live in it free? All you got to do, Pop, is pay the taxes and take care of the property. If anything goes wrong, fix it. Do the maintenance. You can't let it go to waste, they say. He said, that's a good deal. So I bought his house from him. He got a couple $100 grand in his bank account to do whatever. So he took Ma and they went on Danube River cruises. They went on tours. They had a good old time. They saw a lot of nice places. And then one day, mom was committed to full-time care. Medicaid said, we're claiming the house. I said, no, you're not. They said, we're entitled to all their assets. I said, the house doesn't belong to them. Well, we have a 7-year look-back period. We can claim all assets under the marriage at that time. Terrific, but I bought the house 13 years ago from them. Therefore, the house is not claimable under your laws. And yes, that was correct. So a life estate in this case preserved the family house. Now I can do whatever I want with that house. I can move into it if I want to. I could rent it out. Currently, I'm renting it out and making pretty darn good money from it. My brothers are like, when are we getting our cut? I'm like, how much did you pay to get the house? Oh, that's right. They didn't. Oh, sorry, guys. The fact is this, guys, there's many different reasons why people would use a life estate. There's not just one reason. There could be several. I gave you examples of 2. There could be others. The fact is it exists and people use it for various reasons. Why they do it, the mentality of who would do such a thing is unrelated to the topic. The topic is life estate exists. These are the conditions, and that's what you have to remember to pass the test. So I hope I answered your question, but were there any others before I wrap up this life estate stuff? Life estates give people reasons to want to kill you. Motivation. Yeah, I'm going to write a crime novel based on a real estate intrigue and all kinds of stuff. That's good. I don't understand how the life estate may be sold, leased, mortgaged. Okay, let me just moderate the conversation once again. So remember, let's say it's Gary again. Gary, I'm giving you a life estate based on your life. He now owns the ownership interest of that property. He doesn't own the property. He owns the ownership interest in the property. If he decides to sell the property, he's selling his interest, not the property, because the property is not his to sell. It's his to care for and take care of and maintain. But if he chooses to sell his interest, if somebody wants to buy Gary's interest, then they would pay Gary for the ownership interest only, not the actual ownership of property. Therefore, if Gary dies, that investor who bought his rights now has to leave the property, because when Gary's life is over, whoever bought his interest, their interest terminates immediately upon Gary's death. So a life estate owner has true ownership of real property rights, but they don't actually have the rights, full rights of ownership per se. They don't have the right to dispossess the property, sell it, or alienate it. They could lease it. Who's going to rent the apartment based on Gary's life? Well, somebody would in a short-term scenario. They could mortgage it, but what bank would give Gary a mortgage knowing that he had a life estate interest only? No one would. Because as soon as Gary dies, I'm sorry I'm being so morbid about you, Gary. I hope you live a ripe old age. But if Gary dies and the mortgage interest then is extinguished and the mortgage company has nobody to go after for the mortgage because it can't be attached to the property because he actually didn't have dispossession or alienation rights to the property. You can see where this can be a little problematic. Therefore, life estates should never be entered into lightly. Always consider talking to a real estate attorney to find out if this is actually right for the scenario you're thinking of. Now, once again, a life estate is based on the person's life. So Gary gets to use my Malibu estate home as long as he's alive, but the moment he's dead, it reverts back to me. Gary could sell his right or interest, but the moment Gary dies, that person who bought the right or interest, their rights die too because Gary's dead. I could give Gary the property based on a third party's life, then it would be a life estate pour autre vie. But when that third party dies, Gary must move out of the apartment or the house, the estate, because his interest dies based on the person's life who just was granted on. So you can see where this can be a little confusing. But again, once again, all life estates end when the person whose life the estate was granted dies. All life estate interests end when the life of whose base when the life of the person who's granted the life estate interest ends. All right, I think I got that right. Was there any further wrap-up questions to fee simple, fee determinable, or life estate? So you bought the house, but the deed type was a life estate? No. I just granted them a life estate interest in the property. I own the property. If you passed before your parents were in a care facility, what would happen to your parents? Well, my power of attorney rights are then transferred to my brother. He would then be in charge if he's still alive. I would also imagine that you can restrict the life estate where the person can't sell, lease, or do whatever he wants. Correct, Raju? Yes. Again, they are not given the right to dispossess or actually, they don't have the right to alienate the property, sell it. Can you take back a life estate from the person that you gave them before they died? No, you cannot. Can there be a temporary estate person, not like a renter, but someone to be in the house for a limited amount of time? No, because it would be based on someone's life. That's what the definition of a life estate is, based on someone's life. So I could give you temporary interest in a property, but it's based on someone's life. So if that person lives 100 years, that interest is not temporary. It's kind of long term. Hopefully I got that clear, but does anybody else have any other questions before we move on? Okay, very good. Thank you, Amelia. Well, Gary, I hope when you take over the house, you get to live a long time in it. Gary lives. Long live Gary. All right, guys, let's move on. I'm sorry, I may have missed one. I may be a bit early, but if you're issued your parents' house in a will, does that grant you the house over the Medicaid? Ooh, hang on a second. Let me consider what you're asking me. Well, first of all, if I'm issued their house in a will and then they die, that's when I get their house. So there wouldn't be any Medicaid. So I'm not sure what you're asking me, Amelia. But anyway, let's move on. I'll open up. Go ahead, Amelia. Maybe I misunderstood your question. Medicaid, medical bills might have accrued before death. I'm sorry, wait a minute, I'm missing something here. You said that Medicaid would grant full access of their house? No, I did not say that. Guys, now, when you get older and your parents are that age, guys, you're all gonna get there. You have to understand about Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid is the full-time care of an elderly person, in this case, because of their condition. My mom had early onset of Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, the fact is, under Medicaid, when a person is committed to full-time care under Medicaid, Medicaid is entitled to all of the assets that that person owned when they were alive as forms of payment to take care of them. If they were married, then they'd get half of the estate interests, and my father would be left with half of the value of everything left, because Medicaid would take half of everything if mom was committed. Unfortunately, Pop also had issues and is committed, so they both went into full-time Medicare, and Medicare came against all their savings accounts, investments, and everything else that wasn't protected prior to 7 years of their commitment into full-time care. So long as things were established prior to 7 years before they were committed, Medicaid can't touch them. Like that house that I purchased from them. They can't touch the house. They can touch the money in a bank account that they still had, but they can't touch the house because it was transferred out of their ownership prior to 7 years before that happened. Now, the sad part about it, Medicaid is looking to expand that backward-looking window up to 10 years. Just so you know, maybe you can prepare for your elderly parents or whatever and be a counsel to your parents or them, or your grandparents in the case where they're starting to have problems. Just understand, guys, this is not a set thing. What I did is I called up my attorney. I said, hey, Steve, help me with this. I'm not sure if this is the right way to go. He said, there's a couple of alternatives you could explore, but this is the way I think we should go. So we went the life estate route, and we did. Now, it's not for everybody. It's not for all occasions. It is not your typical transfer of ownership of property. So just so you're aware of that, then there should be no issue. All right. Was there any other questions before I move on? How does life estate differ from living will? I'm not an attorney, Dennis. If you want definitions of a living will, you should contact an attorney to get their definition. I wouldn't know how to give that information to you. I'm not an attorney and I can't give legal advice. Sorry. Okay, so I do need to move on, guys. But Mark, I'll allow your last question. Go ahead. Mark Padilla, are you still pissed at me because I didn't give you the life estate and that you died and Gary had, oh, sorry, no. Can I do a brief review of the different ones? Okay, I will moderate the conversation, do a real quick review. Life estate, full ownership interest, highest recognized form of ownership in real property. It's not conditional ownership. It doesn't rely on other conditions. It is what it is, and you have full control, complete control of the entire estate for as long as you want. You have all the rights of ownership. You actually own the property. There's no conditions of ownership. A fee determinable interest is one that is a conditional interest of property. So if title is or deed is passed to the new owner that has conditions of ownership with reversion clauses attached, that means it's a fee determinable interest. So if that buyer violates the conditions of the deed because of the reverter clause, my heirs or me, if I'm still alive, can exercise my right of reversionary interest and regain control of that property without paying a nickel. A life estate is granted to someone based on their life, but when that person dies, the estate interest ends. Or a life estate pour autre vie. The example was I give Gary the Malibu estate home based on Mark's life. Pour autre vie for the life of another. When Mark dies, Gary's got to move out because his life estate interest ended. There's a reversionary or a remainder man clause in a life estate as well. That's the quick and dirty 1, 2, 3, how they differ and what they are. But again, all you have to know is what they are, not how they're used or the reasoning behind them. That's not being tested on. So I hope that answered your question, and I do appreciate the fact that you need clarity, but I do want to start moving on, guys. So let's move that. Now, dower and courtesy rights. The hell is that, Jensen? Well, let's understand something. Times have changed. Under the rule of dower and courtesy, dower meaning the female interest, courtesy meaning the male interest. This is reserved for married couples. Now, I also recognize that in today's society, it could be 2 dower interests or 2 courtesy interests. The fact remains this. If husband and wife, I'm going to use the colloquial terms, husband and wife as married spouses, if they were married prior to May 28, 1980, then they had dower and courtesy rights, which meant this. If, let's take I'm going to use a whiteboard. So let's say husband and wife own their house in Hackensack, right? They got this nice little house out in Hackensack. All right, so only the husband's name is on the deed, but because of an interest we'll talk about this afternoon called ownership by the entirety, husband and wife equally own the property by rights of possession. So both husband and wife fully have ownership interest in this marital residence they call a home. Now, during their marriage, the husband also buys a house on LBI for a vacation house. Only his name is on the deed. The husband also buys the Adirondack vacation house where they spend their winter skiing up by Whiteface and all that other good stuff. And the husband, unbeknownst to the wife, bought the little love shack in Hackensack, and she knows nothing about it. So all this property, the Hackensack house, the love shack, the Adirondack house, and the house in LBI are all owned by the husband. The marital residence is something different. Even though the wife didn't buy the property or have an ownership interest created on the deed, by the virtue of their marriage, she's the 100% ownership interest of the marital residence as well as the husband. They both have what are known as 100% inchoate interest in the real property of the marital residence. This is if you were married before 1980 and owned property. So let's say the husband dies. Now the wife is the only one left. The husband died. The wife is the only one left. Husband dead. She now gets the marital residence because of what's called her dower rights. She also gets the Adirondack house. She also gets the love shack, and when she finds out about that, she kills me twice. Now I'm double dead. Then she then also gets the house on LBI because of the marriage they enjoyed. So if you were married and owned property before 1980, no matter whose name is on the deeds, if one spouse dies, the surviving spouse inherits all property under the marriage, and all property by the husband or the deceased party automatically is transferred into the surviving spouse's name, 100% ownership interest. That's dower and courtesy rights, where the survivor becomes complete owner of all holdings that the other spouse may have owned or equally owned under marriage. Now, let's take the same example. You own the little house in Hackensack as your marital residence, and you're married after May 28, 1980. Again, the husband goes and buys the house on LBI. Nothing's in the wife's name. Remember, everything's in the husband's name. He's got the love shack, and he's got the house in the Adirondacks. And now the husband dies. Husband dead. Wife survivor. Because no new dower and courtesy rights were created after May 28, 1980, and we don't care why, just that it exists. Because there are no dower and courtesy rights because they were married after May 28, 1980, then upon the husband's death, the wife gets the family residence because of rights of possession. She lives there, but she does not have the right to the Adirondack house. She does not have the right to the love shack, and she does not have the right to the LBI house. In fact, these three properties are going to be dispersed by the husband's will, and whoever he names gets the properties. The wife has no input. All she gets is the marital residence because of what's known as rights of possession, but that's it. She may have no interest in any of the old properties because her name was not on the deed. She has no ownership rights. If the husband's will is read and it says the LBI house goes to the son, then the son gets that. The Adirondack house goes to the daughter. She gets that. And the love shack goes to the little Missy he had been courting for the last few years. She gets that. In other words, the marital residence only is the wife's property, nothing else. This is known as before May 28, 1980, there was dower and courtesy rights. After May 28, 1980, no new dower rights were created, no new courtesy rights were created. And if the couple wants to sell any of those properties during either time, if the husband's name is on the properties, he can sell as owner only. But if it's the marital residence, no matter if it's before or after May 28th, if they want to sell that house, then both parties must sign because both have interest in the property. Whew. That was a 10-minute presentation of a very difficult topic. Did anybody have questions? And I expect there's going to be a few. What if he dies intestate without a will? We're going to talk about that a little later, Gary. Does wife get them? No. The only thing she gets is the marital residence. What if marital residence is owned by an estate? Then what do you mean? Can you specify what you mean, Raju? I'm not understanding how a marital residence is owned by an estate. You mean other than the husband and wife? It's they're renting the building? Is that what you mean? Then it's not. Then they don't own the property, so you wouldn't be getting it. I may be missing the point. What if the marital residence is owned by an estate? Okay, that's the question. What if there is no will? We're going to talk about that a little later. I promise we'll get to it, but we will. This is vice versa, right? If the wife has a love home, it goes to her boyfriend. Just saying. Yes. Yes, Yanni, if the wife has the love shack, then she has the right to give to anybody she wants if the husband's name is not on it. The estate meaning tied to a trust, it is still marital property. The survivor would, whoever surviving, the husband or the wife, would then inherit the rights of the trust. That's what would happen. I hope I answered the questions. But there has to be a will for the wife to give to her boyfriend. Hang on a minute here, guys. Remember, if the wife is survivor and her name is on a property, she doesn't need a will to convey interest. It's hers. She can just give it. She can give it or sell it. I'm assuming you mean if her name is on the deed when the husband died, then she is part owner of the property and does have survivorship rights of ownership if her name is on the deed. But if it's not, then she has no rights after May 28, 1980. Was there any other questions? Is the full law name in the book, like state versus XX? Not that I'm aware of. No, not that I'm aware of. What if there isn't a will? Again, we're going to talk about that later, guys. I know you want to know, but I said twice already, now 3 times, we're going to talk about that later, not right now. And this doesn't apply if they're co-owners on all houses, right? Yes, because then they would both have survivorship rights. So if one died, the other gets the property as a surviving owner. Yes. All right, I think I answered the questions, but if there's others, go ahead, Dennis. What is it? What if there's more than one boyfriend? You guys are wacko. You guys crack me up. You playa. You'll play, yeah? Dennis, was there another question? No? Yes? What if there are more than one love? Okay, come on. Come on. I gotta stop. Moving on. So once again, If a husband and wife are married prior to May 28, 1980 and own property, then upon the death of one spouse, the surviving spouse inherits all assets under the marriage, all properties. There is no question. The surviving spouse gets everything. If they were married after May 28, 1980 and own property, then the surviving spouse only gets the marital residence because what's known as right of possession, she lives there. Is she entitled to the other properties? If her name is not on them, no. And if there's a will, then it's dispersed by the will. If there's no will, then here's the kick in the teeth. The state of New Jersey determines who gets it. And they might not give it to the wife. So understand, guys, it's always important to get a will. So I do need to move on. I know we have additional questions, guys, but again, we have a time frame. We still have another chapter and a half to get through before we're done today. So that was dower and courtesy rights. Before I start encumbrances, did anybody have any wrap-up questions to fee simple, fee determinable, life estates, or dower and courtesy interests? Not seeing any questions, then it is time to move on. Encumbrances. We're changing topics here, changing gears. Let's get busy. An encumbrance. What's an encumbrance? An encumbrance is a claim, a lien or charge, or liability attached to and binding on real property. What do you mean? What's a claim or lien? What is our charge? What does that mean? There could be a financial encumbrance against the property, an outstanding mortgage that hasn't been paid yet. In order to sell that property, the seller has to pay off the bank to relieve the financial lien against the property so the new owner's not subject to that mortgage. Nobody wants to buy a property where an outstanding debt is now passed on to them. No, I want you to pay that off. So a lien is a financial claim or interest in real property. Your mortgage company files a lien against the property if you don't pay your tax, if you don't pay your mortgage. Then they claim repossession under foreclosure and then gain possession when you're kicked out. And the house is then theirs. A lien could also be a tax lien. All tax liens are incorporated January 1st against all taxpayers' property. And if you don't pay your quarterly taxes, that lien is enacted against you and you can lose your property as a result. A lien, once again, is a financial interest or claim against property. I gotta ask, did anybody not understand what a lien is? And we're going to talk about different types of liens. But the basic premise is that a lien is a financial claim or interest in real property. Not seeing any questions, and good, everybody's on the same page and understands. Then moving on. There's also liabilities that could be attached to properties that are not financial in nature, like physical or usage encumbrances. What's that? A physical or use encumbrance could be, examples would be an easement, where you give someone a right to use your property. It could be a license. You give someone permission to use your property. It could be a deed restriction limiting the use of the property for some purpose. It could be party wall agreements. We'll talk about those later. So in other words, it could, so an easement, as we'll discuss, and there's many different types we'll discuss as well, is a right in property granted to another. So you have financial claims, liens, you have usage claims, easements, then you have other usage claims or encumbrances against property. Like what? An encroachment. Oh yeah, my neighbor built that storage shed, but it came 2 feet onto my property. In other words, Your neighbor made a physical claim on your property by putting his building across the property line. That's not allowable. So that encroachment, somebody of the neighbor's property comes onto your property, must be removed, because that's now an encumbrance on your deed. So when you get a survey done when you're selling, the surveyor is going to tell the buyer, hey, you got an encroachment over here. What are you going to do about it? I didn't know there was one. Well, you got to solve that before you can transfer ownership, or else the new owner maybe just lost 2 feet of their property through a claim. Who knows? What? Well, this could happen. So we need to know about all kinds of encumbrances. So once again, a lien is a financial claim or charge against property. Easements, encroachments, and licenses are physical or usage encumbrances against property. Did anybody not understand the definitions that were clearly explained in the book that I just went through? Oh, wait. Repeat what? What do you want me to repeat, Leslie? I think I repeated just 3 times already. Okay, you know, if you keep asking me to repeat, it makes me believe that you guys didn't pre-read these chapters before you came, and that everything's brand new, and you want clarity when you could have already had that solved. The difference between the usage claims. So the usage claims, the physical usage claims, could be an easement, it could be a restriction, it could be a license or an encumbrance. Okay, very clear. We're all set to go. Tim, can you put some if the definitions into song? Gary, what am I, your puppet to perform here for you? Good Lord. No. But if you insist. No, I'm not going to do that. I know you're kidding. I'm kidding you too. Kira, did you have a question? I see your typing is open. No? All right, let's move on. So let's talk about liens. A lien, as I said, is a financial claim or interest in property, usually there to provide security for a debt or obligation against that property by the owner, such as a mortgage claim or a financial lien because of tax payments. Understand, first of all, there's 2 types of liens. One is a voluntary lien. The other one is an involuntary lien. Let's take that mortgage and the taxes. The mortgage is a voluntary lien. You chose to buy that house using mortgage money. Some people choose to buy cash, which means there's no voluntary liens that they created against the property. They paid cash. But if you use the mortgage like 99% of all people do, then you voluntarily create a financial claim against your property by agreeing to taking the mortgage money. Remember, a mortgage is the right of the bank in the property upon granting money to buy that property, and you hypothecate or grant that property as collateral against the loan. So therefore, if you don't pay your mortgage, that bank can repossess your property away from you, foreclose. So a mortgage is a voluntary lien. The property taxes, on the other hand, are not voluntary. You got to pay them whether you like it or not. You don't have a choice to say, hey, Mr. Town, I don't want to pay property taxes, okay? Yeah, they hear that, they're going to start now giving you a hard time. Every person who's not tax exempt must pay property taxes in New Jersey, whether you like it or not. And because you must, it's an involuntary lien. Anybody who owns property and is not tax exempt must pay the property taxes. You don't have a choice. It's automatic. Again, voluntary, a mortgage would be an example of a voluntary lien. Involuntary would be the property taxes. You don't have a choice. You got to pay them. Liens can be classified as general or specific as well. Let's take your property taxes as another example for a specific lien. Your property taxes are based on a specific parcel of real estate. The land value and the improved value of that specific property generate a tax bill against that property. Therefore, it's a specific lien against that one property. That should be easy enough to understand, right? So then what's a general lien? A general lien goes against all property that a person may own. An example of a general lien is when you don't pay your income taxes. The IRS has the right to file a general lien against everything you own. That means they're going to take your house, your car, your ATV, your motorcycle, all your toys, all your clothes, all your personal belongings, jewelry, investments, and even your bank accounts. They're going to take everything that you own and hold it ransom until you work deals out with the IRS to repay them. Therefore, a general lien goes against all your property. A specific lien only is granted against one specific property. Did anybody not understand these definitions as I relayed them to you? Not seeing any question. Oh, there is questions. Well, wait. Or not. Nope, got it. Maria, did you have a question? So can you pay someone's tax lien and own their property? Ah, Maria. Oh, God bless you. We're going to actually spend all morning tomorrow morning talking about property taxes and what happens when someone doesn't pay their taxes. So I'm going to actually say, Maria, we're going to talk about that tomorrow morning, but really good question, and we're going to address it tomorrow morning. I don't want to put you off, but we're going to cover that in chapter 8 tomorrow morning. Again, one more, Valentina. No? That's it? Oh, okay. So, Mark, did you have a question too, or just teasing me? I'm just going to moderate. I do need to move on because I only got a couple minutes left before we're breaking. So what are the effects of a financial claim or lien against title? Well, first of all, liens and other encumbrances, encroachments, restrictions, run with the land. Meaning, if you want to buy my property, anything that comes with it, liens, encumbrances, easements, restrictions, licenses, whatever, encroachments, well, then you're buying those too because they come with the property. But I don't want that stuff. Well, then don't buy the property. But I want the property, but I don't want that stuff. Well, then we're going to have to do something to get rid of those encumbrances on the deed. In other words, I may have to pay off a mortgage. I may have to restrict the license, cure the encroachment. There may be ways I can solve this, but there's some things like an easement that is taken by somebody I can't remove on a deed unless the court agrees. So you have to do your title searches before you buy to understand not just what kind of property and under what condition you're owning it, but what are all the other things that come with it. Do I want those encumbrances, or some people refer to them as title defects, when I buy the property? Because then I have to pass those on to the new owner. That may restrict my ability to sell. So we need to understand what the effects of liens are on title rights. So it could encumber those rights, but they go with the property when sold. So liens, financial claims attached to the property, not the owner, except in New Jersey when you get a mortgage. Remember, you're going to sign a promissory note that makes the debt personal to that debtor. Even though it's attached to the property, the responsibility to repay is from the debtor himself. So we're going to end our morning presentation on that note. The conversation tab is going to be left open because in a minute or two, Lauren or Noel, somebody's going to come on and answer any of your admin questions you have. But I will be coming back to you at 1 o'clock to restart the conversation, finish this chapter, and move on to chapter 7, 5, 6, 7, yeah, and we'll be finished by 4:30. So again, I will see you at 1, and stand by for Noel or Lauren to help you with any admin questions you may have.